Job chapters 1 to 3 today, and this is quite an exciting day because this may be the first time I've pronounced something from the Old Testament correctly, because Job is spelt Job. So I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. I knew it was pronounced Job. I can't quite work out if I know this because I was brought up in a vicarage and some of it may have stuck, or it could actually just be because of Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise. I don't quite know. Anyway, this is a very different book to what we've read before, because we've been reading a lot of historical stuff, and now that seems to have completely stopped because there's no way to date this, apparently. And I have had a quick Google. Google says it doesn't know who wrote it, doesn't know when it's set, it doesn't involve any Israelites or anything at all, so it's a proper deviation from the story of Israel. And it's broadly agreed that this is not a true story, as in, not literal story anyway. I mean, obviously, my feeling was that the story of Adam and Eve isn't a literal story, but it seems that the Christian world is somewhat divided on that. But it seems everyone agrees that the story of Job is not literally true. That makes it a little bit more exciting, I think, because you get a story that's supposed to be a historical account. If someone does something stupid, you don't know if it's meaningful or if they're just a muppet, like Jeff in episode 59. You can dismiss the whole thing almost. It's just like, well, there's no meaningfulness in that. It's just Jeff was an idiot. In this, we know it's not literally true. No one thinks it's literally true, I think. So we are looking at the meaning of it, which makes it a lot more interesting, I think. To some extent, anyway. Job, anyway, is said to be a good man, a particularly good man. Almost, God describes him as blameless, I believe it is. So, I mean, I guess that almost gives you a hint that this isn't literally true, because I'm pretty sure we're clear that a human being can't be sinless. And it's suggesting that Job kind of is, or close to. So he's basically like Superman in terms of God's eyes, I guess. It notes that he's even such a good person that he does daily sacrifices to cover his 10 children, just in case they've sinned internally, and he doesn't realise that they've done that. In that respect, he clearly seems a better person than even the likes of David and Abraham and so forth. We then go completely weird, and we now cut to heaven. So we've got God having some sort of meeting. And he talks about a bunch of angels are toddling along to this. One of the things among their number is Satan. So again, he's just sort of popped up very casually. It's a real disjointedness there, isn't there, between the modern cultural idea of Satan is pretty scary and dramatic. And in the Bible, it's just, he just turns up and has a chat with God. God, anyway, just greets him casually. Hi, Satan, what you been up to? And Satan's answer is brilliant. He's just been toddling around on the earth, going to and fro. It's interesting that his answer is so benign, because presumably what he was actually doing was he was toddling around getting all the bull worshippers and tricking them into setting fire to their own children and doing terrible things like getting baked beans and spreading them around the place. I don't like baked beans, work of the devil as far as I'm concerned. But no, he just talks about wandering around to and fro, and God seems quite happy about this. God then brings to his attention Job, which is very nice, really, is it? Explaining how virtuous and wonderful Job is. And Satan's answer is that, well, yeah, of course he is, because you give him everything for being good. So, yeah, he's figured out, whereas everyone else hasn't. If you just do the right thing, you get the good stuff. From there, God basically dares Satan to take it away and gives him permission to do so, with the caveat that he's not allowed to actually harm Job himself. We then cut back to down on earth. Job's pottering about doing stuff, and then we get this wave of messengers, 4 messengers come in quick succession, all delivering escalating levels of terrible news. Basically, there's a fire that burns up some of his animals. I forgot to say, yes, Job, it seems, is a rich man, insofar as, I don't know, if you've got several camels and goats today, it doesn't make you very rich, does it? But I understand in the context of the time that would seem to have made him rich. But a fire gets rid of some of these, and then some raiders come along and whip off with some other animals. And then the peak tier of bad news comes that all 10 of Job's children were in a house and the roof fell in on them and they are all dead. So, yeah, Satan has properly gone to town, and it's a good job this isn't a true story, isn't it? Otherwise, this would make for some very interesting debates and some very squirmy apologists, I imagine. But no one is claiming this is a literal story, so we can just take it for what it is and see if we can pull out some meaning. Job's reaction is interesting in that it's very interesting in the context of later stuff. It's pretty relaxed and groovy, given he's just had his 10 children killed and he's presumably now broke. And evidently we've stumbled across the origins of the phrase, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, just without the eths in this version of the Bible. I guess it's always either Shakespeare, Mark Twain or the Bible, so that shouldn't have been a surprise. But yeah, generally he's relaxed and groovy, he still worships God. The point is made and laboured to some extent that Job doesn't blame God for this. We then return back to heaven and another little meeting, so the angels are toddling on and Satan goes along. God greets him in the same way, what have you been up to, and baked beans and all the rest of it. The long short version of that is that we then escalate, so God gives permission to Satan that he can now harm Job, but he isn't allowed to kill Job. And then basically Job ends up with a whacking great case of leprosy. Interesting from this, we get 3 friends come along to see Job because they hear it's going a bit wrong for him, so come and support their friend. And Job rants about basically cursing, not God, but cursing the situation. And it runs to nearly an entire page of the Bible, this rant. Very teeny writing, so that's a lot of words. But it's interesting that he was relaxed and groovy when his children died, but very grumpy when he's got a bit of a skin problem. Perhaps I'm just underestimating the skin problem. And there has to be something to be said for the compounding effect, of course, in that if you have one bad thing, you put another thing on top, you've now got 2 to deal with. But yeah, so that's basically that. And say in the short version, it's quite simply God does this terrible, cruel thing of basically daring Satan to go and try and ruin the life of a perfectly good man to see what happens. It's a bit weird. Obviously with the caveat that no one's claiming this is a true story either, so not saying that level of cruelty is actually true. In terms of the interesting stuff to come out of that, I'm still planning to do a tangent on Satan at some point, because there's a real lot to get stuck in with there, and I have some real sticking points on the whole Satan idea. But I found it interesting that he's very subtle. No, he's not subtle. Very indirect in terms of how he works. In that you might think he's going to turn up with horns, trident, fire, and it's going to be all scary and terrible. But it seems he doesn't even appear at all. He just drops a house on 10 children. It's not subtle. Indirect, not subtle. And in many ways that's similar to how God does stuff as well, isn't it? So it's interesting that seems to be universally how power is wielded in the heavenly realm or something like that. Secondly, we also obviously have cruelty from God. That's obviously helped to a significant extent by the fact this isn't a true story, and no one's claiming it's a true story. But we've got to pull some meaning from this. So we'll have to see by the end of the book, is that actually a thing? Because obviously terrible things do happen to wonderful people. So this is one explanation of how that might come about, but that seems a bit metaphorical and unlikely. It seems a little inconsistent with other stuff anyway. But I do like this trying to tangle with this subject of suffering, because it is a difficult one. I don't think suffering is disproof of the existence of God at all, as I've talked about several times before. I don't think that makes any sense as an argument. I think it's perfectly reasonable that God could exist and be caring and a nice God, and there would still be suffering. There seems to be several reasonable explanations for why that would be. But it is a really interesting subject to get stuck into, so I like that. And for that reason, I've been looking forward to Job, because I'd heard that this was all going to be about the devil and all the rest of it. But yeah, so next episode we've got a basic conversation between Job and his friends. I haven't read it yet, so we'll go on and see shortly what that is about for next week.